Visit personalinjuryatl.com for all your personal injury needs.
Against any of the detention officers involved in the death of Stephen Fossett. We are here. I am joined by our co-counsel, Attorney Nathan Fitzpatrick, the family, Mrs. Paula is here with the entire family, and our investigator Hicks. And so we want to start by just framing this for everyone. It's very, very important that the citizens of Bibb County are clear about what happened here. So one of the things that you learn very early on, not even in law school, just in life, is that if you start out with a foundation that is not solid, that ultimately you'll end up with something that is built on sand. That's what has happened here from the very beginning, that this investigation was in fact started out very, very faulty, and we have to highlight for the citizens so that everyone is clear about exactly how faulty this was, because this could happen to your loved one. You could be in this same position. So we begin first with the reality that unfortunately the report that was released yesterday did not lay out the real fact that the sheriff never alerted District Attorney Howard. We have to begin there, that this was always an inside job, that the sheriff was committed from the very beginning to not informing District Attorney Howard. In fact, she admits the way she found out was through our advocacy and this family's advocacy. We know that our investigator reached out to her office to try to alert her, but this was never about the sheriff being transparent and going to her and saying, hey, we have a in custody death that we're going to need to turn over to you. Secondly, the GBI was not called in by the sheriff. What we know as best practices is when there is a death in custody at the hands of law enforcement, that the best practice is to call in an outside agency and not to investigate it yourself if you are committed to transparency. We know that that didn't happen. And so we want to make it clear that from the very beginning, this was a decision made by the sheriff that he was going to do an internal investigation, and it wasn't until the district attorney found out through this family's efforts that she had to reach out to him and say what's going on, and then she became involved. So that's the starting point. So when you start there, I think the citizens of Bibb County should be very concerned about that process. You can demand that your elected official change that process. You can commit to ensuring that this never happens to another family so that they're not left wondering why or how this happened. So what did we learn on yesterday when we met with District Attorney Howard? Myself, along with Investigator Hicks, and his mother were present, and they talked about the tasing, the amount of tasing, that it did not exceed the 15 seconds that the training allots. That doesn't mean that it didn't contribute to his death. It just meant their protocol says that you can tase someone up to 15 seconds continually, and that you should not exceed that amount of tasing. So he was at, they say 13, maybe 11 seconds. Again, it does not state that that did not contribute to his death. In fact, the expert on his death would be the medical examiner, not the district attorney who did not have an opportunity to interview any witnesses. So I want us to be very clear. The district attorney received interviews from the sheriff's department and then reviewed those interviews, reviewed the body cam footage and the taser reports, but not one person involved in his death was ever interviewed by anyone from the district attorney's office. That is a review, not an investigation. That's the reality of it. And it can be for a number of reasons. And so, again, we know many district attorneys don't have the capacity. We have a case right now where in Alabama where the district attorney is having to rely on another agency. But the agency they're relying on is not the agency accused of the wrongdoing. And so that's what makes this one even more complicated and alarming. Another issue that you see throughout the report is this synthetic marijuana. It's almost as if the synthetic marijuana is like having a cigarette inside of the jail. Like, it's so commonplace. How in a controlled area would a man who we know and this family has repeatedly said had a mental health diagnosis and mental health issues, how would he get access to this synthetic marijuana? And why is that not a concern? What have you heard from the sheriff about their commitment to ensuring the safety of their inmates? Isn't a part of ensuring the safety of an inmate who has a mental health condition and that they not have access to anything that could hurt or harm them? Wouldn't that be a concern for everyone? Again, these are some of the issues that have to be raised by community members. I know that it feels easy to say, well, that's them. But in community, we say what happens to one happens to all. And so there's a responsibility for the citizens of Bibb County to not allow this to stand. There's so many things wrong about what happened to him, that he was not taken to a mental health facility when we know he was arrested because he was having a mental health crisis. That he would have access to this synthetic marijuana even though he had mental health crises, and that folks would stand around, they would be able to see because the cameras are there, he's being monitored, and see him drinking out of a cup and smoking what they believe is synthetic marijuana, and they don't do anything about it until he begins to have some effects. And then finally, the way that the video, and fortunately, before the report, we were able to, Investigator Hicks, myself, and his brother were able to watch the video. And so the notion that they were monitoring him after this physical assault upon his body is just not accurate. It is not. They were not monitoring him. In fact, they were milling around, talking amongst themselves, and it was after a period of time had passed that they realized, oh wow, he's not breathing. And so that was when they went into action. And so what we're asking, and you'll hear from Attorney Fitzpatrick now about what our next legal steps are, but I would hope and pray that the community would embrace this family in ways that it really has not as of yet, and say, we are sorry for what happened, that it should not have happened, and that we will, as a community, ensure that it does not happen to another family. Because if there is not a groundswell of organizing efforts to address what happened in this jail, rest assured it will happen again. we do this work across the South, if you do not address the underlying circumstances, if you do not address the policies and procedures, the systemic failure, this system failed him. And if you don't address it, it will absolutely happen again. And so with that, I'd like Attorney Fitzpatrick to come up so that he can share our way forward. Trust and believe this is not the end for us, for this family, for this fight. And he will be able to go into details about how we'll continue to fight, to organize, and to ensure that there is justice for this beloved son and brother and uncle. Attorney Fitzpatrick.
Thank you for that. I was always told when I was young that what's done in the dark at some point has to come to light. And looking at this situation and hearing what Attorney Davis said about this, it's time for everything that happened in this situation to come to light. For months, approaching a year at this point, we've been stonewalled and prevented from having access to the documents, to the videos, to the witnesses, and to the individuals that were responsible and involved in this incident. Well, now that this investigation or review, as Attorney Davis appropriately called it, now that this review is complete, there is no reason for anyone to withhold any sort of information, any documents, or any videos at this point whatsoever. So while their quote-unquote investigation has been completed, our investigation that we've been prevented from pursuing at this point should now fully commence without any barriers whatsoever. There is no provision in the law that will allow them to further hinder the release of the videos that are present in this case. What justification do they have? The people deserve to know what happened to Stephen Fossett. And for a year or more now, they have not had access to that information. In fact, as you heard Attorney Davis say, the district attorney's office was giving everything by the sheriff's office. The fox can no longer guard the hen house. The people have to know what happened. The people have to have unfettered access to everything so that we as a community can judge ourselves what happened to Stephen Fossett. And we as a legal team will take the information that we are given, should it be released at this point, legally released at this point, and we will pursue all causes of action should we deem them to be appropriate. And based on what we've seen thus far, there is absolutely some liability on behalf of the Bibb County Sheriff's Office for what happened to Mr. Fossett. That is no quote about that. Now, the DA's investigation focused on criminal liability. Our investigation will focus on civil liability. And at this point, we are demanding, as we have submitted a new open records request, since this investigation has been deemed complete, we are demanding the full release of any and all videos that are pertinent to this case. And we don't want the cut-up videos that the district attorney's office received. We don't want the manicured interviews that the district attorney's office received. We want to have access to everything we need to actually build the foundation of an investigation that should have been built and should have been there in the first place so Mr. Fossett can have justice. That is what we're demanding. That is what we're seeking. We are not done here. We are not giving up on this young man, and we are not giving up on this family. We will pursue justice for him.
We want to provide the family an opportunity to just share what they have been experiencing. And again, yesterday was a tough day for Mom and for the family. But we are grateful and we are honored that our firms are able to represent a family who is full of faith, rooted in faith. And again, it's the prayers of this mother who has kept all of us going. And so we just want you all to hear from them, and we'll answer any questions you might have. I'm going to move the microphones over so that she can remain seated.
Good evening, everybody. Thank y'all for coming out. Our family does deeply appreciate you all coming, keeping up with my son's story and helping us to spread his story and what happened to him. Of course, yesterday was a very, very disappointing day. I was very disappointed to hear the results of the DA's investigation, but I was not surprised. Just given the dynamics and living in Macon, Georgia, and hearing the stories and reading, on the internet, it's just not surprising how it turned out. But it just made our family more determined to get to the truth. It has not wavered our faith, not even a little bit. We just want to get justice for Stephen as anybody else would want to get justice for their loved one. Ours is no different. And if it continues, there were stories before my son. And I was like everybody else. You read about it and you shake your head and, oh my God, that happened. But it's continued to happen because nobody spoke out. Nobody was active. Nobody stepped in. Nobody wants to go against the grain or change anything. So it has fueled a more determination in our family to get to the truth and to get my son's justice.
We'll open it up for questions. Yes.
If I could, this is for you, Mr. Davis. You were indicating on the fact that synthetic marijuana was in the jail in the first place, and also talking about how even not just today, but even before in other press conferences, how Stephen Fossett should have been in a actual medical facility rather than the jail. Just want to confirm, does this mean that it's more of a systemic issue that was in play here, and rather than just an issue with of course there was an issue with the officers that were tasing him, but it's more of an issue, a systemic issue in the jail itself?
Absolutely. I think if we look at this in a broad context, and I think that we're in a moment in American history that we have to focus on this system and whether or not this system is serving the most vulnerable. People who are having mental health crises, what duty does this system owe? What should be done with someone who we know is not a criminal, should not be treated as a criminal, but should be treated as a person with an illness that is sick, right? Who has a mental health crisis going. And so the system that says put him in general population, not putting him in a medical ward, not getting him referred out so that he can get placed back on his medication. It's acknowledged in the report, in the DA's review, that he was paranoid schizophrenic and had not been on his medication. Is there any indication that he was ever given his medication when he arrived back in the jail? Is there any indication that he was, in fact, at least considered to be outsourced and sent to a mental health facility? No. That's the issue, is that he should have never been there. He should have never been there. They put these deputies in a predicament to deal with someone who really needs the support of mental health experts. And so what do you do with that? Will this county, will this country stand by and just say, well, we got him locked up, we took him off the street so he's not an eyesore to the rest of the community, and we locked him away, and by the way, let's let them take any drug that is not prescribed and do whatever just so that we can calm them down. This is absurdity. But this is the America that we're living in right now. And no one's going to take a stand on this. What county commissioner is raising up on this? That's what we're dealing with. So yes, it is a systemic failure. While these individual officers were not held criminally liable, we still think that there is civil liability, as Attorney Fitzpatrick has lifted up. There is civil liability, and that the Americans with Disability Act should have applied, even in custody. He did not give away his rights as a citizen. They should have applied.
Just to focus on, just piggyback on what Attorney Davis said, and just speak to some of the things that are actually in the report itself. There's an indication that when he was initially in distress, that people were able to communicate with him to get him to calm down. Well, all of that went out the window once force and pressure and tasing and everything else entered the room, right? Where you have an individual with a mental health issue who responds to counseling, who responds to verbal consideration, all of a sudden is in distress when they're confronted with force. And that's what unfortunately led to his death. In fact, that they were pursuing this cause of action, which further escalated the situation and then resulted in this man losing his life.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned that none of the deputies involved in his death was actually interviewed. So as you all pursue civil liability, is there one, room to interview those individuals, and then two, who was actually interviewed?
So the district attorney's office didn't interview anyone. The interviews that were conducted by the sheriff's office. The people who, the sheriffs that are charged, that we believe are responsible, their bosses who said we couldn't get the records, they did the interviews, right? And so, of course, during the course of civil litigation, we would look forward to the opportunity to depose all of the officers, sheriff, all the parties, so that we can sit them down, because the GBI didn't get to do any interviews either, because they were never called in. And when the district attorney's office requested the GBI come in, the GBI made clear it's too late. You know, basically, we don't want a part of your mess.
Right.
You started this, now you know, months later, it's too late to call us in because the whole situation has been tainted by your involvement. That's the truth of the matter. We have the letter where the DA, to her credit, said, GBI, won't you get involved? And GBI says, no, too late now. This madness is already, this train has already left the station. What can we do but try to clean up? And unfortunately, you know, what appears to even be, you know, sanitized. You know, when I look at the report, let's just be honest. You weren't called in. In the very first 3 lines of the report, of the review, you weren't called in by them to help. You had to call them. You know, let's expose that. Let's talk about that.
So that back and forth is in the report between Howard and the GBI?
No, that's not in the report. But we have the letter from the GBI, from Howard to the GBI requesting their involvement. But that's not included. You know, those are the kinds of things for full transparency, to provide proper context. You say, first, I'd like to say that we weren't called in, and we found out months later, and then we reached out. Second, they never called the GBI. Why are we telling you that? Why shouldn't that be in the report if it's, you know, part of for full transparency? And the sheriff at this point, he can make the statement, yeah, I didn't call him in. You know, he can explain why. I didn't call the GBI. Explain why.
I'd like to open this up to both the legal team and the family. From what I understood, some of the videos you guys watched yesterday, pretty disturbing. What were some of the things that stood out to you, and just what were those initial emotions?
So we didn't watch the video yesterday. We watched it in a previous city. Myself, investigator hit. We were all there. You know, anyone want to share what you want to talk about? What you saw, brother?
That's pretty hard to talk about, man. What I saw was, you know, like I said before, man. I like he spoke on, you know, it being a time period of, you know, the incident happening and him getting some kind of help or response to him happening. It's a pretty big gap of just sitting there watching your brother die, you know, while others stand around and eat chips standing next to him while he's dying. You know, that's tough to watch. You know, you play on your phone. I'm watching it on the screen. He's going. What are y'all doing? If I saw the full time of when they put him on a gurney to his passing was, you know, in the moment it felt like forever. So I can't say, you know, I was sitting there 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 7 minutes, but it was in that ballpark, I believe. But it felt like, you know, felt like a year sitting there watching it.
Yeah, I think what he's talking about more than anything is just a disregard for human life, right? There was this incident, and then after the incident, everybody's just like walking around, milling around, as Attorney Davis said, almost breathing a sigh of relief, like, oh, that's over. But yet, Mr. Fossett is still on the gurney, still in distress, and at that point, his life is leaving his body. I mean, he's sitting there dying. And, you know, he says 5, 7, 8 minutes. From what I recall, it was almost 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, they were basically just hanging around in the medical unit, just shooting the breeze, and all of a sudden somebody said, hey, this guy's not breathing no more. And then all of a sudden pandemonium breaks out. You know, if the videos are released, you guys can see this. You know, that's something we can time. That's something we can look at. That's something we can accurately tell you. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't been given access. You haven't been given access. The public deserves to know all of these things.
I know from experience, often when you ask them for things like you're seeking, the excuse is it's part of an active investigation, therefore not open to open records. Your contention, as I understand it now, is that since they say there's no case to be made, that's not a real argument, right?
No, it's no longer an argument whatsoever. And since this investigation has been quote unquote concluded, we have resubmitted our open records request, and we expect to receive everything at this point.
So one big open records request, or like a bunch of them? Like, give me a sense of how much and what you're asking.
Yeah, we want everything from everybody. From the GBI, from the District Attorney's Office, from the Bibb County Sheriff's Office, from the Taser manufacturing companies. We want all the information that is available in this case, and we want it released pronto.
As far as the district attorney's office side of things, in your conversation with Attorney Howard on yesterday, do you feel like she was as transparent as possible with what she was given, or is there still something more from the DA's office and specifically?
I think she was given crap. She was just given trash. And I wish she'd call it like that, but she was just, what was she given? She was given some coworker investigating another coworker. You know, people who watch each other's back, who go to each other's barbecues, eat at each other's dinner tables, or investigating each other. And so here are the statements. And then, you know, here are the videos that they chose to pull, to download, you know.
Edited, not in full format, right? You know, what we saw was basically a number of different videos that were kind of strung together in succession. And it was presented to us, and well, that's what I received. Well, any person looking at this can see that, no, this isn't the full beginning, this isn't the full ending. You know, there's more to be had here. So the evidence that she was given was cherry picked.
We need it all. I mean, this family deserves it all, from the beginning to the tragic end. And we've gone through this with families before. We've watched hours of jail videos before, just in cases, because it's what we have to do. It's what being thorough requires. And when a life is taken, I mean, we can't take shortcuts. We can't. And so that is what's driving us, is Stephen was a human being, and we want the world to know that, and we won't stop.
I know you guys mentioned your focus on civil liability at this point. Can you confirm that you're actually planning to file a lawsuit in the near future? Are you planning to sue?
The first step is that we have to submit what's called a presentation of claims to the county. You know, we're hopeful that they will comply with our open records request, so that we have the evidence to review and to complete our presentation of claims. It's very difficult to have a presentation of claims when they won't release the evidence of what happened. But we're gonna submit that presentation of claims and go from there. We're gonna go wherever the evidence leads us.
Do you have an idea of when you're trying to present that by?
It has to be done within 1 year of the incident. So the presentation of claims will have to be submitted in May.
And I guess as an extension of that, this has been going on for almost a year now, and I can't imagine just how difficult it's been for both parties here, legal and family. What are you hoping comes of this investigation? What else are you just hoping the public can learn about this investigation?
So what we hope more than anything is change. You know, we don't want this to happen to anybody else. I mean, that's the mission. You know, this isn't about money. This is about change and making sure that there's no other family in Macon-Bibb County that has to deal with this. And it's a systemic issue. It's a training issue. It's a transparency issue. It's just a situation that can't happen again. And that's what we're really seeking more than anything.
We've been down these roads before. There was a period in the history of Georgia that if law enforcement was involved in a death, that they could investigate themselves. And the death of Kevin Davis, one of our clients in DeKalb County, with the pressure of family and community, that led to the change, the policy change of saying the GBI needs to be brought in. We hope that Stephen's passing will at least result in a change across the state, where if someone dies in custody under these kinds of circumstances, that they will have to bring in the GBI and not do an internal investigation. That's the kind of thing that we needed to have happen down at the Gold Dome over the last 40 days when they're passing all of this other stuff. That's something that can be implemented that safeguards everyone. If transparency is what the American people and Georgians believe is important, then legislate it, make it so. And so that's, the effort. It's not just right now, but what does the future look like in terms of how these kinds of matters will be handled? And then what is the responsibility when someone comes in with a mental health diagnosis? Remember, he wasn't brought into the jail for any violent offense. He wasn't brought into jail because he was, robbing, stealing, killing. He was brought into jail really because he was having a mental health crisis, and it was just a simple criminal trespassing. Just that, right? That says, I need help. What will the policy and procedures be going forward when someone in that condition needs help? Can we build an alternative than putting them in jail? These are some fundamental questions, and we have the resources. How will we use them? Does it mean enough?
And just to confirm, especially when y'all were hired and y'all were going through the process of looking into the investigation, like the video footage and the interviews, especially like the video interviews and stuff. And since you mentioned that you got bits and pieces of the full Stephen Fossett dying in custody thing, you've never received the full video? And you've never received video of the interviews of the deputies that tased him?
No. Nothing has been released by the sheriff's office today. The only thing that's been released was an initial incident report that was prepared, one pager that was prepared shortly after his death. That's it. Everything that we've seen, we saw with the district attorney's cooperation. And thanks to her for that.
Right.
But other than that, the sheriff's office has not released anything.
I say again, she was put in a very bad position by not being called initially. She set us down, showed us what she had. She did a review of what she was given, and now we sit here, ready to keep going. Again, we want to thank. I know the family wants to thank everyone who has been supportive, praying for them. Obviously, a very, very difficult time, and we just ask that you would continue to pray for us as well. Of what happened, but we're going to submit that presentation and claims, and go from there. We're going to go wherever the evidence leads us.
Do you have an idea of when you're trying to present that by?
It has to be done within 1 year of the incident. So the presentation of claims would have to be submitted in May.
And I guess as an extension of that, this has been going on for almost a year now, and I can't imagine just how difficult it's been for both parties here, legal and family. What are you hoping comes of this investigation? What else are you just hoping the public can learn about this investigation?
Well, what we hope more than anything is change. We don't want this to happen to anybody else. I mean, that's the mission. This isn't about money. This is about change and making sure that there's no other family in Macon-Gibb County that has to deal with it. And it's a systemic issue. It's a training issue. It's a transparency issue. It's just a situation that can't happen again. And that's what we're really seeking more than anything.
We've been down these roads before. There was a period in the history of Georgia that if law enforcement was involved in a death, that they could investigate themselves. And the death of Kevin Davis, one of our clients in DeKalb County, with the pressure of family and community, that led to the change, the policy change of saying the GBI needs to be brought in. We hope that Stephen's passing will at least result in a change across the state where if someone dies in custody under these kinds of circumstances, that they will have to bring in the GBI and not do an internal investigation. that's the kind of thing that we needed to have happen down at the Gold Dome over the last 40 days when they're passing all of this other stuff. That's something that can be implemented that safeguards everyone. If transparency is what the American people and Georgians believe is important, then legislate it, make it so. And so that's, the effort. It's not just right now, but what does the future look like in terms of how these kinds of matters will be handled? And then what is the responsibility when someone comes in with a mental health diagnosis? Remember, he wasn't brought into the jail for any violent offense. He wasn't brought into jail because he was, robbing, stealing, killing. He was brought into jail really because he was having a mental health crisis, and it was just a simple criminal trespassing. Just that, right? That says, I need help. What will the policy and procedures be going forward when someone in that condition needs help? Can we build an alternative than putting them in jail? These are some fundamental questions, and we have the resources. How will we use them? Does it mean enough?
And just to confirm, especially
Choose to support and fight with these families because it's a lot to see a family go through what they've gone through and to not get the answers that they're seeking and that they deserve and that we all deserve. And so thank you all for continuing to lift up his name, continue to tell his story so that hopefully we will have full and complete transparency in the coming days. And we will update you 7 days from now as to whether or not the sheriff has complied with the open records request law. Right? There is a law that we have triggered by sending our open records request. And so we hope that they will comply with the law. And we'll update you 7 days from today on whether or not there has been compliance with the law. If there hasn't, you'll receive a statement from us.
Thank you. Visit personalinjuryatl.com for all your personal injury needs.